The courtroom was too quiet. Every breath, every shuffle, every whispered note, it all felt magnified. Like the air itself was holding its breath. And right in the middle of that silence stood Jasmine Blake. Straight-backed. Unmoved. Alone. She didn't need to check the room to know the stairs were heavy. Journalists. Staffers. Opposing attorneys. Even a few politicians in disguise. They weren't here for justice. They were here to watch her fall. At the bench sat Judge Harlan McIntyre, a man whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. Conservative, cold, and ruthless toward anyone who dared challenge his authority. Especially women. Especially black women. He didn't hide it either. When Jasmine entered, he didn't stand. Didn't greet her. Just peered over his glasses and muttered, "Let's get this over with." The clerk barely had time to call the hearing to order. The charge? Contempt of court. Her crime? Calling out judicial bias during a live-streamed public hearing. Her words had gone viral. Unbecoming of an elected official, they said. Inflammatory, they claimed. But what they really meant was, she had embarrassed the wrong people. So they sent her here, to make an example out of her. To humiliate her in a courtroom that felt more like a stage. The prosecutor wasted no time. His voice was sharp, smug, practiced. "Your Honor, Ms. Blake has demonstrated repeated disregard for the dignity of this court. Her statements were not only slanderous, they undermined public trust in the judiciary. We are requesting the maximum penalty." He sat back, smiling like it was already done. The judge gave a slow nod. His fingers tapped the bench rhythmically. He looked down at Jasmine like she was a fly he could flick away. "You may speak," he said. "But I suggest you tread lightly." Jasmine stepped forward. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. In her fitted black blazer, she looked less like a defendant, and more like someone giving closing arguments to history itself. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, clear, low. "Let's not pretend what this is." The judge stiffened. Raised his brows. "This isn't about contempt," she continued. "It's about power. About fear. About silencing voices that make you uncomfortable." A few gasps fluttered from the gallery. The judge slammed his gavel once. "You're out of line, Ms. Blake." She didn't step back. "I've been called worse for less," she said quietly. The room held still. "I've served as a public defender. I've walked into jail cells. Sat with mothers who lost their sons. Fought for people this system forgot. And I've never been afraid to speak truth to power." The judge leaned forward. "Truth?" he mocked. "You think what you said was truth?" She met his eyes. "I think the people listening did. That was it." He grabbed a paper from his clerk. Scribbled fast. Slid it back. The clerk rose, holding the form like a verdict. "Effective immediately," the judge said. "Ms. Blake is fined $15,000 for contempt. Failure to pay will result in suspension of her license to practice." Gasps again. Jasmine didn't move. She took the paper. Read it. Then looked back up. "So that's it?" she asked. "That's what justice looks like now?" The judge smirked. "This court is not your pulpit, Ms. Blake. Your speech may work on Twitter. Not here." He thought it was over. He thought he'd won. But Jasmine Blake didn't walk into that courtroom to lose. She came prepared. She came armed, with something none of them saw coming. And in just a few seconds, she would turn the entire courtroom on its head. The judge didn't just sign the fine, he doubled down. "Let this serve as a reminder," Judge McIntyre said loudly, his voice echoing through the chamber. "No one is above the law. Not even rising political stars with a taste for drama." He smirked when he said it. The kind of smirk that doesn't hide contempt, it parades it. Gasps again. A few reporters stopped typing. A cameraman outside the door leaned in just a little closer. But it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like he was enjoying himself. Like Jasmine wasn't a respected official with years of service, but a nuisance he could finally swat away. And still, Jasmine Blake didn't flinch. She simply stared at the bench. Not angry. Not broken. Just sharper. Like a blade being honed. "I don't need your reminders, Your Honor," she said slowly. "I know the law better than you think." The judge leaned back. "That arrogance is exactly why you're here." "No," she said, eyes narrowing. "I'm here because someone was afraid of what I said, and even more afraid that people listened." From the gallery, murmurs rippled. A woman in the second row, an older lady with gray braids and a civic pin, nodded quietly. A young law student near the back scribbled faster. Someone whispered Jasmine's name like it was a chant under their breath. The energy was shifting. And Judge McIntyre felt it. He banged his gavel again. "This is not a rally!" His face flushed. But Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Then stop making it a circus," she said. A hush. He rose halfway from his chair, glaring. "You're on thin ice, Ms. Blake. Don't test me." But it was too late. Because what he didn't realize was that he had been testing her. And Jasmine Blake wasn't alone in that room. She didn't come with a legal team. She didn't bring a bodyguard or an entourage. But she had something stronger. A reputation. One she had earned, case by case, community by community. People remembered when she stood up for a teenage boy wrongfully accused. When she exposed corruption in the city jail. When she stayed up 3 nights straight drafting reform bills that everyone said wouldn't pass, until they did. This courtroom had walls. But her voice went beyond them. McIntyre knew it. And he hated it. So he turned cruel. He leaned in again. This time lower. Sharper. "Pay the fine. Apologize in writing. And resign from the ethics committee, quietly. Or I'll open a formal investigation into your license." The threat hit the room like ice water. Even the court reporter paused typing. There it was. The real plan. They didn't just want to find her. They wanted her out. Out of influence. Out of public favor. Out of the spotlight. Because Jasmine Blake had gotten too bold. Too loud. Too effective. And Judge McIntyre? He was just the weapon someone else chose to pull the trigger. Jasmine took a slow breath. Looked down at the paper in her hand, the $15,000 fine. She folded it once. Cleanly. Slipped it into her folder. Then looked up. And smiled. Not a big smile. Just a flicker. Enough to say, "You just made a mistake." The judge scowled. "Do you find this amusing?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned, facing the gallery for the first time. And spoke loud enough for every soul in that room to hear. "You want me gone?" she asked, voice calm. "Then do it. Strip me of my title. Find me. Humiliate me." She took a step forward. Just one. "But you'll have to explain to the public why you silenced a black woman for telling the truth." Boom. That hit. Hard. People weren't whispering anymore. They were watching. Really watching. And for the first time, McIntyre looked nervous. But only for a moment. Then he sneered. "You're good with words, Ms. Blake. But let's see how well you do when the state bar gets involved." He snapped his fingers at the bailiff. "This hearing is adjourned." The gavel came down hard. But Jasmine didn't move. She stood there, as the courtroom began to empty, her feet rooted like stone. The clerk walked past her without meeting her eyes. The prosecutor didn't look so smug anymore. And that woman in the second row? The one with the civic pin? She stood up. Walked right to Jasmine. And said just loud enough, "They're scared of you. That means you're doing something right." Then she slipped Jasmine a small, sealed envelope. Jasmine opened it. Inside, one line, handwritten. "When you're ready to fight back, call this number." And under it? A badge. A federal one. The headlines came fast. By noon, every major outlet had the story. Representative Jasmine Blake fined $15,000 for courtroom outburst. Judge calls out disrespectful conduct from rising lawmaker. Ethics committee member faces professional sanction. The spin wasn't subtle. It wasn't justice, it was a takedown. Cable hosts dissected every word of her speech. Online pundits called her reckless, unstable, and too emotional for public service. And behind the scenes, it got worse. That afternoon, she received a formal notice from the State Bar Association. An inquiry had been opened. Her license was under review. The message was clear. Back down, or we'll bury you. Her staff was shaken. Donors started pulling out. Even a few allies told her to just pay the fine, issue a soft apology, and move on. But Jasmine Blake didn't come this far to fold. Not after everything she'd survived. Not after fighting her way through a system designed to shut women like her out. Not after losing her father to a wrongful conviction. Not after putting herself through law school working double shifts at a diner while memorizing case law on breaks. This wasn't just about a fine. This was about silencing her. For good. She sat alone that night in her office, lights low, the courtroom transcript still on her desk. The envelope the woman had handed her, still open beside it. She stared at the number. It had no name. No agency. Just one badge number and a single instruction. Call when ready. And still, she hesitated. Because even Jasmine Blake, steel-spined and battle-tested, understood what came next might burn everything down. And she had worked too hard to build all this. But then she opened her inbox. Hundreds of emails. Thousands. From strangers. From mothers. Teachers. Young lawyers. Grandparents. Activists. All of them saying the same thing. Don't stop. You gave me hope. They don't know who they're messing with. And one, from a girl named Lena, age 15. Miss Blake, I watched your hearing in class. My teacher told me to be quiet. But I couldn't. You made me feel powerful. Please don't give up. We need you. That was it. That was the spark. Jasmine picked up her phone. Dialed the number. It rang once. Then a voice answered. Flat. Calm. Dangerous. We've been waiting. She didn't ask who they were. She didn't need to. Because she recognized something in their tone. Power. Real power. The kind that didn't need to shout. And 2 hours later, she had everything she needed. The next morning, the State Bar held a closed-door session to consider emergency suspension of her license. Reporters were blocked from entry. But word leaked fast. The prosecutor who had spoken at her hearing, Mitchell Grady, was present. So was a senior investigator from the Judicial Review Board. And at 10:14 a.m., Jasmine walked in. Alone. No attorney. No entourage. Just a single folder in her hand. The panel barely looked up. Ms. Blake, the chairwoman said, bored already. You're aware this is a disciplinary session, not a platform. Jasmine said nothing. She opened the folder. And handed out copies of a document. A few pages. That's all it took. Then she sat down. Crossed her legs. And waited. For 5 long minutes, no one said a word. Because every set of eyes in that room was frozen, staring at the papers in their hands. Bank statements. Call transcripts. Travel logs. All pointing to one thing. A coordinated campaign to weaponize the judiciary against political figures deemed problematic. And at the center of it? Judge Harlan McIntyre. His name was on private emails with prosecutors, discussing Jasmine's public statements before her hearing ever began. One line stood out. She needs to be shut down. We'll start with a fine. Another email was worse. If we can get her license flagged, she'll think twice before opening her mouth again. The room didn't just go silent. It sank. As if the air had been vacuumed out. One committee member cleared his throat, eyes wide. Ms. Blake, where did you get this? She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She simply said, let's just say, Not everyone in the federal system likes being used as someone's personal hit squad. The chairwoman looked at the transcript again. Then at Jasmine. Then at the rest of the panel. And for the first time since the hearing began, Jasmine Blake saw fear in someone else's eyes. Judge Harlan McIntyre didn't show up to court the next morning. He had called in sick. But the truth was already out. By 9 a.m., the federal investigation was no longer a secret. By 9:15, news outlets had the leaked emails. By 9:30, Jasmine Blake's face was on every major network in the country. Not as a defendant, but as a whistleblower. The tide hadn't just turned, it had crashed like a wave, swallowing everything in its path. And at the center of it all was Jasmine. Calm. Composed. Relentless. While reporters scrambled to get statements, she walked into her office building like it was just another Monday. No sunglasses. No entourage. Just her and a thin manila folder under her arm. Inside was the final piece of the puzzle. See, the documents she had handed over the day before weren't just damning, they were part of a broader investigation. One that had been brewing quietly for years inside a little-known division of the DOJ's Civil Rights Task Force. That number she'd called? It hadn't just connected her to help. It had plugged her into a pipeline of data, sealed indictments, secret memos, internal audits, all pointing to the same pattern. McIntyre wasn't alone. He was part of a web of judicial figures, prosecutors, and political operatives who'd been targeting outspoken officials, especially women and minorities, under the guise of ethics enforcement. Jasmine had been a test balloon. They'd hoped to break her quietly. Instead, she cracked the entire system open. And now the fallout was everywhere. By noon, 3 more judges had been suspended. 2 prosecutors had resigned. And McIntyre? He was under federal surveillance. But Jasmine wasn't done. Because exposing corruption was only part of the mission. She wanted justice. So she returned to the same courtroom, the same seat where she had been humiliated, this time, not as a defendant, but as a federal witness. Her presence alone changed the room. Same wood-paneled walls. Same gavel. Same clerk. But this time, every eye that once watched her with judgment, now looked with something else. Respect. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat. She simply handed over one more file. An affidavit from a former court clerk. Sworn testimony that McIntyre had doctored case calendars, pushed suspicious cases to certain prosecutors, and, most damning of all, attempted to have audio logs of Jasmine's hearing altered before they went public. That was the breaking point. The presiding federal judge closed the chamber doors. And when they reopened 40 minutes later, a U.S. Marshal walked out. With an arrest warrant. Signed. Stamped. Active. For Harlan McIntyre. At 3:46 p.m., he was taken from his home in cuffs. The same hand that had banged the gavel to find Jasmine Blake was now gripping the inside of a police van. Reporters swarmed. A woman from the courthouse gallery, the same one with the civic pin, stood outside and clapped once. Then again. And others joined her. It wasn't a riot. It wasn't a protest. It was something quieter. More powerful. Reverence. Because in a world where justice often moved too slowly, and truth was buried under power, Jasmine Blake had done the unthinkable. She fought back. And won. But not with fury. Not with fire. With facts. With timing. And with a name they'd all remember. That evening, she gave a short press statement. No more than 60 seconds. No grand speech. No dramatics. Just this. I wasn't punished for contempt of court. I was punished for refusing to play along. But when the game is rigged, you flip the board. Then she walked away. No questions. No follow-ups. Because the story had already been told. And the final chapter was already writing itself. The courtroom looked different now. Not the walls. Not the furniture. But the weight in the air. Gone was the condescension. Gone was the smugness. The cold, lingering fog of power misused had been swept away. In its place? Silence. Respectful. Humble. Even the clerk, once dismissive, stood a little straighter when Jasmine Blake walked in. She wasn't there for herself. This time, she came to testify, one last time, at the judicial ethics trial of Judge Harlan McIntyre. The man who once told her, "In my courtroom I am the law," now sat at the defendant's table. Hands folded. Shoulders hunched. A lawyer whispering in his ear. But there was no saving him now. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails. Witnesses. Recordings. And worse? His arrogance. It was on full display in the transcript from Jasmine's hearing. Every condescending word. Every loaded silence. Every abuse of power. Now played back, line by line, for a full judicial panel to hear. He didn't even try to defend himself. He just sat there. Silent. Waiting. When Jasmine took the stand, she didn't look at him. She looked at the panel. And the audience. And the rows of young interns, junior attorneys, and law students who had come to witness the reckoning. She spoke plainly. "Power means nothing," she said, "if it's used to punish truth." Someone in the gallery wiped away a tear. A few rows back, that same older woman with the civic pin nodded again. When Jasmine stepped down, there were no more questions. No objections. Just one final verdict. Judge Harlan McIntyre was found guilty of judicial misconduct, abuse of power, and obstruction. He was disbarred. Permanently. His pension? Revoked. His cases? Reopened for review. And as the bailiff approached to escort him out, Jasmine did look at him. Just once. Not with vengeance. Not with pity. But with clarity. Because justice isn't revenge. It's restoration. 3 weeks later, Jasmine stood at a podium, not in a courtroom, but on the steps of the Capitol. Behind her, a banner read, "Judicial Integrity Act, signed into law." She had turned her fight into a movement. The act mandated third-party oversight for courtroom discipline, limited private contact between judges and prosecutors, and protected whistleblowers in legal settings. It passed with bipartisan support. And it carried her name. The Blake Amendment. The cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. But she didn't stay long. Just a brief speech. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about everyone who ever sat in a courtroom and felt small. About every voice that trembled under power. We're not trembling anymore." The crowd applauded. Not wildly. But deeply. Because they weren't just clapping for her. They were clapping for what she'd made possible. That night, Jasmine walked alone through her office. Everyone else had gone home. She passed the framed headlines on the wall. The one from her first big case. The one from her ethics committee appointment. And now, the most recent. She turned the tables in seconds. She smiled. Half proud. Half tired. Then sat down at her desk. And pulled out the sealed envelope from weeks ago, the one with the badge and the number. She kept it. Not as a threat. But as a reminder. That when systems fail, people rise. That silence can be broken. And that sometimes one voice in a courtroom is enough to shake the nation. She looked out the window. City lights blinking. The Capitol glowing in the distance. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself breathe.